The Checkpoints is presented by pharmaceutical company GM Pharma.
PMC Research Center published a report on the transportation and logistics sector in Georgia. According to the report, railway and sea transportation is down while air transport up. The Georgian Finance Minister Lasha Khutsishvili met with Masatsugu Asakawa, the president of the Asian Development Bank, along with other key figures of the bank. The discussions primarily revolved around the cooperation between Georgia and the Asian Development Bank and the progress of projects financed by the ADB within the country. The meeting focused on the significance of the hosting the 57th annual meeting of the ADB in Georgia on May 2 to 5 this year. In the second month of 2024, electricity transit from Georgia decreased. According to the Georgian State Electoral System, a total of 177 million kilowatts of electricity was supplied to Turkey from Azerbaijan through Georgia in 2 months this year. Last year, in January-February, the total transit of electricity from Georgia amounted to 890 million kilowatts. Accordingly, an 80% decrease was recorded year-over-year. In the fourth quarter of 2023, the nominal gross domestic product amounted to 22 billion lari. The real GDP increased by 6.9% year-over-year, while the GDP deflator percentage change equaled 0.7%, according to the National Statistics of Georgia Geostat. This is The Checkpoints. I'm Elena Kvanchilashvili, author and the host of the show, and the Checkpoints team is ready to sum up Business and Economics Week for you. The EU delegation in Georgia invited the public to submit questions regarding the EU's work in Georgia and how the EU supports Georgia's journey towards EU membership through social media. The Checkpoints has pulled together those questions that the EU Ambassador Paweł Hrczynski addressed.
What does the EU candidate status mean for Georgia and for its citizens? And what can you do to contribute to Georgia's path towards EU membership? Many of you replied to our call for questions, which we opened when Georgia obtained EU candidate status in December 2023. I want to thank you sincerely for your interest and assure you that we are addressing all your questions. Let me start with what the EU candidate status means for Georgia. First and foremost, it is a recognition of the strong support that the people of Georgia have demonstrated for its European future. Georgia's future in the European Union is linked to fulfilling several important steps, the famous 9 steps. Addressing them is crucial for Georgia to move to the next stage, which is opening the accession negotiations. All these steps and stages are not to please Brussels, but to improve the lives of the people of Georgia and to bring Georgia closer to the EU standards. As Georgia has embarked on the path of EU membership, it is up to political leaders to work constructively together and to involve civil society and businesses to address the people of Georgia's European aspiration. You can be sure that the European Union will support Georgia every step of the way. Teona also asked what she could do as a regular citizen to contribute to Georgia's goal of being part of the EU one day. Teona, expressing your support to EU values is the way ahead. As you say, rule of law, human rights should be Georgia's compass on its path towards EU membership.
An International Monetary Fund IMF mission led by Mr. Matthew Gertner conducted the discussions for the 2024 Article 4 consultation with Georgia during March 6 to 18 in Tbilisi. At the end of the visit, the mission issued the following statement, which summarizes its main conclusions and recommendations. Growth remained above trend and 7.5% in 2023, driven largely by tourism, trade, construction and financial services, as well as continued strong investments. Growth is expected to ease to 5.7% in 2024, with consumption playing a larger role, supported by strong real wage growth and employment. In the medium term, growth is expected to converge to its potential rate of around 5%. Inflation fell sharply during 2023 and closed the year at 0.4%, helped by a strong lari, lower commodity prices and a tight monetary policy stance. In response, the NBG has lowered its policy rate by a cumulative 275 basis points since May 2023 to 8.25% in March. Inflation is expected to reach 4% by the end of 2024 as the impact of the favorable external factors from last year dissipated and the restrictiveness of the monetary policy stance is unwound. Inflation is expected to converge back to the target in the medium term. According to the IMF, modest further fiscal adjustment is appropriate in the medium term to build sufficient buffers under the fiscal rule and create room for productive spending. Fiscal deficits in the range of 2 to 2.5% of GDP would help stabilize public debt at around 40% of GDP and ensure it remains below the fiscal rule ceiling in the event of adverse shocks. The adjustment should be underpinned by a medium-term revenue strategy with further enhancement of revenue administration and streamlined tax expenditures and enhanced project prioritization and spending efficiency. The IMF says steadfast implementation of SOE reform and renewable energy development strategies adopted in late 2022 is needed to raise productivity and limit fiscal risks and to ensure the state's ownership policies regarding SOEs are converging with EU principles. In line with the reform strategy agreed with the staff under the standby agreement and adopted in 2022, the SOE law should ensure that the Ministry of Finance is appropriately empowered to have a strong oversight role to monitor and mitigate fiscal risks, and that there is a clear separation between the state's shareholder, regulatory and policy functions to avoid conflicts of interests. Efforts to concretely reduce the footprint of the state in the economy need to be stepped up. The IMF urges the authorities to proceed with the electricity market's opening, which has been delayed again. Further support under the Renewable Energy Support Scheme should be determined based on updated demand and supply projections and net out legacy projects that are advancing under existing contracts. The legacy projects that are not advancing should be terminated, and the costs of the scheme should not create fiscal risks. The IMF believes that the anchoring inflation at the NBG's target will require a gradual and cautious approach to further policy rate cuts. While headline inflation remains low, it is projected to reach the NBG's 3% target during 2024. Further rate cuts should be data-driven, and the decision-making process should be clearly communicated to anchor expectations about the pace of monetary easing, IMF says. Continued exchange rate flexibility and reserve build-up are necessary to guard against adverse external shocks. IMF believes with external inflows moderating and reserve coverage still lower than desired, continued opportunistic reserve accumulation is needed to build further buffers. The NBG should intervene in the FX market only to avoid disorderly market conditions, the IMF says. The IMF maintains that strengthening the NBG's governance and independence is essential to the credibility of monetary policy. In this regard, the NBG law should be amended to ensure a non-executive majority on the NBG's oversight board, clarify and strengthen the succession framework and board member qualification criteria, and move from a presidential to collegial decision-making model. Stronger, more inclusive and job-rich growth requires enhancing education, productivity, infrastructure and governance, and according to the IMF, enhancing the quality of teaching teaching and training and raising agricultural productivity, including by improving land registration and management, can help address entrenched high unemployment and low rural labor force participation. Prioritizing investments in transport, logistics, and energy can help lower trade costs, boost trade diversification, and enhance regional connectivity. While Georgia ranks high in the region and among EU candidates regarding the rule of law and absence of corruption, recent years have seen some slippages in governance indicators. To ensure that governance standards strengthen and support improved competitiveness, Georgia needs to bolster its judicial system and strengthen the anti-corruption authority, the IMF says.
We are near the end of a 2-week mission for the annual Article 4 consultation, which is, as you might know, our annual health check of the economy, which we do for most IMF member countries. Based on this visit by my colleagues and myself, we will present our findings to our executive board, and then there will be a published staff report following the discussions by the executive board sometime around late May or early June. Based on our discussions, and not just with the authorities, but also a wide range of other counterparts in Tbilisi, we can say that the Georgian economy continues to perform well, and this has followed 3 years of strong growth. We expect growth to now ease to around 5.7%, as some of the extraordinary one-off factors that were driving growth well above potential over the last 3 years are beginning to moderate. And this includes the surge in capital flows and in tourism that we saw in previous years, and also the post-COVID boom that we saw early on in this cycle. We see inflation as normalizing and approaching the National Bank of Georgia's target rate of 3%, as the past effects of lari appreciation and other factors and the restrictive monetary policy stance of the National Bank of Georgia feed through into economy-wide prices. Fiscal policy has been disciplined, and we expect the fiscal deficit this year to remain around 2.5% of GDP, and public debt at close to 40% of GDP. This year, the current account deficit is expected to settle at around 6% of GDP, and at the moment, foreign exchange reserves are just about around 3 months of import coverage or so. The financial sector, throughout this whole period of extraordinary uncertainty and geopolitical risks and volatility in markets, has performed well, and the balance sheets of the banking system look robust. So our overall outlook is for continued good economic performance as growth begins to settle close to the economy's medium-term potential after this period of great volatility that I mentioned, which includes the pandemic and Russia's war in Ukraine, which both had an impact not just on countries in this region, but globally. And Georgia has been resilient. Looking forward, while our baseline for growth is solid, there is a lot of uncertainty surrounding the external environment. As a small open economy, Georgia, of course, remains subject to what happens outside. And this includes the geopolitical environment, as well as the shifting patterns of global trade and investment related to what is sometimes called geoeconomic fragmentation. So in this context, being resilient and having adequate external and fiscal buffers is essential to navigate these uncertainties successfully, just as Georgia has done over the past 4 years and demonstrated that it could successfully do so. So there can be no complacency even in the period going forward that those are the requirements to successfully manage the economy and any potential shocks that could emanate elsewhere. So in terms of our broad policy recommendations based on this trip, they are to ensure that the stability and resilience of the Georgian economy continues, and also that reforms are undertaken that will help Georgia in its journey to accession to the European Union. EU accession would help Georgia on many fronts, of course. From an economic point of view, the evidence is quite clear that membership of the EU builds excellent institutions, supports strong policy frameworks, and supports high and stable growth and improvement in living standards, and that has been the experience with countries that have been part of this EU accession process. Therefore, looking forward, anchoring economic reforms around this idea of EU accession would be a very concrete way to chart the path forward in terms of the reform agenda. And of course, since these reforms are built around best practices and what has been shown to work based on sound principles, you will find that the IMF's policy advice will have and has a lot of overlap with what is needed on the economic side for EU accession. Moving to near-term priorities, we recommend a cautious approach to monetary policy normalization to ensure that inflation expectations remain well anchored and inflation approaches the NBG's target and settles around that level, which is 3%. On fiscal policy, a prudent approach now and going forward would ensure that debt remains low and fiscal buffers are adequate, which is a key component of maintaining economic resilience. We recommend a modest further fiscal adjustment over the medium term, and efforts should also be made towards revenue mobilization that would help with needed priority expenditures to sustain strong and stable growth. It is also important to ensure that the independence of the central bank is safeguarded, and it is important that state-owned enterprise reforms under the new state-owned enterprise law is in line with the commitments on the SOE reform strategy that was agreed with the IMF in late 2022. On the structural agenda, we again reiterate some of our past recommendations that would help enable Georgia to become more dynamic as an attractive place to do business and to draw in foreign investment. This will help Georgia take full advantage of opportunities from global growth and technological changes. This includes enhancing the quality of teaching and training, raising agricultural productivity, reducing trade costs, and improving connectivity. There is also a need to strengthen governance, which would also improve competitiveness and bring it closer in line with European Union norms.
Let us now briefly review what was new in business this week. Natia Taktakishvili will tell us more. Porsche Center Tbilisi introduced a new third-generation Porsche Panamera in Gudauari. All models have a new design, updated service concept and innovative technologies, including the Porsche Active Ride, which offers a much higher level of comfort along with the sporty design of the car. An additional option is a screen for passengers who can monitor the vehicle data, control multimedia or watch any video or movie. We always try to make the presentation of Porsche models distinctive and memorable. That's why we decided to organize the presentation of a new Porsche Panamera at any different location. We prepared a mobile structure for the vehicle, especially for the event. The presentation was held in the territory of Hadahat Gudauari, where movement was possible only by snowmobile transport. We are very happy that the presentation of Panamera received a positive response from our guests. Tamar Khosroshvili, head of marketing at Porsche Center Tbilisi, said the partners of the event were insurance company Aldaki Premium brand Primo and company Sarajishvili. The new models of Porsche Panamera are already available at Porsche Center Tbilisi. Radisson Blu Iberia Hotel has been voted Georgia's leading business hotel at the World Travel Awards 2024 for the fourth time. The World Travel Awards celebrate excellence across all sectors of the tourist industry and in key geographical regions. Known as the Oscars for tourists, this year's
Gala Award ceremony took place in Berlin, Germany. The awards are complemented by a series of regional gala ceremonies which are attended by key influencers and figures in the travel business. This year's business hotel winners were chosen through a severe process of votes cast by sector professionals and public alike. Located in the heart of Tbilisi, Radisson Blu Iberia Hotel is an upscale hotel catering to business and leisure travelers. Since its opening in 2009, Iberia has been a centerpiece of Georgia's growing reputation as business travel destination. Under Silk Hospitality's management, it serves as a flagship for the excellence in customer service which we deliver across our portfolio of hotels, restaurants and other leisure facilities. CEO of Rooms Hotel Valery Checheria declares that unchanged hotel room price show that there is an oversupply. According to Valery Checheria, one of the ways to improve the situation is to activate the conference part. There is an excess of supply compared to the demand. We could not even return to the average price that we had before the pandemic. If there was an adequate demand, the price would rise. From my point of view, it's most important to work in new directions and activate the conference part, says Checheria. According to the plan of the Ministry of Economy and Sustainable Development, 320 new accommodation facilities should be built in the country by 2027, in which 1 billion lari will be invested. Winery Ascanelli is working on the diversification of exporting markets. The director of the company, Irakli Ugulava, notes that the instability of the Russian market is the reason for this special need to increase the exporting portfolio. We expect that the price of excise duty on alcoholic beverages on the Russian market will increase from May 1. Based on these and other decisions, the company is trying to diversify the market. Our exporting markets include 27 countries, of which 5 we added in 2023. Among them are countries that have never been in our portfolio. Last year, we exported to Switzerland, Brazil, Thailand, Japan and Turkmenistan, says Irakli Ugulava. The director of Ascanelli notes that there is a demand for different products on warehouse market. As he notes, Georgia's niche in the foreign market is quarry wine. Although the field has developed so much over the past 2 decades that it has maintained a certain quality, and national wine agencies involved in the exporting process as much as possible. That's why the highest quality product is sold from Georgia. Irina Mghebrishvili, financial and administrative manager of Achaea Georgia, declares that passengers pay a symbolic price on domestic flights amid the subsidy. According to her, domestic flights are associated with very high costs and it's necessary to revise the price under the conditions of the new tender. In this period, the state subsidy amounts to over 62%, while the amount paid by the passenger totals to over 39%. I consider it as a symbolic price, but many Georgian citizens will not agree with me and say that they can fly to Thessaloniki for 90 lari. The country is small. Aviation is quite an expensive sector. The maintenance costs are very expensive, so the main thing is that flight frequency should be very high, Mghebrishvili told TV program Business Morning. Georgia domestic flights connect 4 local airports: Natakhtari, Ambro, Lauri, Mestia and Batumi. One of the oldest brands in Georgia, Laghidze Waters, has an updated logo and a new business development plan. Tinatin Laghidze, chairman of the supervisory board of Laghidze Waters, spoke to BMDG about the details of the logo and brand renewal. Mitrofani Laghidze ordered the logo to Diego Zaziashvili, a very famous artist at that time, but the Soviet times destroyed and damaged individualism and aesthetics of the logo. Sometimes it was removed and the product was sold in a facelifted form. Now we ordered the renewal of the logo to a young group, for which it was a big challenge, but they did an extraordinary job, Tinatin Laghidze said, adding that the company's products are currently sold in about 100 food outlets. We enter a lot of cafes and the interest is growing even more. Today, Laghidze Waters are represented in over 100 food establishments, said Tinatin Laghidze. According to her, after the rebranding, the company plans many activities, including export, although the management does not want to talk about the details in advance. Ipkli Diromi Plus bread exports. As the director of the company, Nisan Yosebashvili, told BMWG, the company is equipping the enterprise, after which the production will start and the bread will be sent to China and Israel. The company supposedly will invest over 1 million lari at the initial stage. As Yosebashvili says, the demand for their bread comes from these two countries and partners are already waiting for the supply. Bread is more expensive in Europe compared to Georgia. That's why there is a demand for our bread. We are working on equipping our plant, which is quite an expensive pleasure. We hope to start exporting late this year. Baked and then frozen bread will be sent from Georgia, said the director of Ipkli Diromi. In 2023, Ipkli Diromi bought a land area of over 4,000 square meters located on the airport road from the state for over 1.9 million lari, where part of the production is planned to be moved. Spice manufacturing company YMS Spices has started cooperation with the American company. As Georgi Gogia, the founder of the company, told BMWG, this is American brand which sells spices in Miami. The US-based company contacted YMS Spices over 6 months ago and offered to create a range of spices for them. YMS Spices accepted a proposal for cooperation and started working to meet the relevant requirements for exporting of spices to America. This is a new American brand that was looking for an international outsourced company for the production of spices. As a result of research, they found us. We worked on for over 6 months and created a range of spices for them. As a result, we sent 6 types of spices amounting to 500 kilograms to Miami. We agreed with this company that we would become their exclusive supplier, which means supplying 3 tons of spices annually, and this volume will increase over time, Georgi Gogia noted. According to the co-founder of the YMS Spices, this is the first case of cooperation with American companies, so they had to get a certificate from the FDA. YMS Spices sells over 500 kilograms of spices every month, of which 50% is produced in Georgia, while another half is imported. In addition to the local market, the company exports the spice to Azerbaijan and Hungary. The cottage Geluk, located on Tsarichamia Buriani Road, is planning to open another cottage this summer, for which over 70,000 lari was invested. The founder of the cottage, Gela Izoria, told BMWG that they decided to add a new cottage due to the increased demand and a large number of bookings. The cost of accommodation in the cottage varies depending on the number of visitors. The minimum price per night amounts to 150 lari. The second cottage is smaller and can accommodate about 6 people, Izoria says. The founder of the tourist facility also talks about more future plans and notes that in about 2 years, the addition of a third cottage will be considered, which will also have its own catering facility. The cottage will have 2 floors and will be able to host relatively more people. At this stage, we don't have any employees and we take care of the cottage with our own efforts. However, after building the catering facilities, we plan to hire staff, said the founder of Geluk.
Georgian startups and their products are one of the most frequently discussed topics on BMG, as these companies drive innovation forward in our country. Several prominent Georgian startups developed their product in Georgia but expanded internationally. Among them, Kernel is one of the most prominent, as the company is trying to solidify itself in India, the world's largest market. Recently, however, Kernel suffered a massive loss as the company's co-founder and CEO, Georgi Tukhashvili, tragically passed away as a result of a skiing accident. Yet, after a tragic occurrence, Kernel and its team remain strong. There are few changes in the management too. Colin Donahue would succeed Georgi Tukhashvili as CEO, while Chris Berry would take up the role of chairman of the board. BMG's Business Evening and Tech Inform host Georgi Aroni sat down to talk with Colin Donahue about Kernel's future. Let's watch the interview.
Colin, hi.
Hi, good to see you.
Likewise, it's been a while. We talk quite frequently. We had quite a few interviews as well, but now the interview we are about to have is a bit different because you have a new role. You are now the CEO of Kernel, and Kernel is a company that is very close to you, very close to me as well, due to one very sad reason, which is Gio Tukhashvili, our dear friend who sadly, tragically passed away. But after that, what I've seen is that I've seen Colonel being as strong as ever and continuing doing things in memory of Gio as well. And one of the changes that the Colonel introduced is you becoming the CEO. Let's talk about the change. Let's talk about how the company adapted to tragically losing its CEO.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for having me here. Yeah, I mean, Gio was one of the best people I've ever known. Good friend. We worked together for 7 years, built up the Startup Grind community here. I mean, I won't go into the list of things that we sort of built together in small ways. And Gio was getting ready to work with Becca and Michaud and the Colonel team to grow Colonel in India in an amazing fashion. So I had worked, quite closely with him on the new strategy, which I'll share a bit about. Quite frankly, most startups in the condition that Colonel was in, to lose the CEO, and especially somebody as talented as Gio, most companies would just immediately fold. So it's really amazing how the team came together. Some of the investors who were backing it, who were friends of everybody involved, came together. I put some stuff on hold to help the company move forward. And even my friend Chris Burry, who is sort of rock star Silicon Valley guy, nine companies, over $1 billion in exit value, just very, very serious guy, who came to live in Georgia. He came in as the chair of the board. So he worked with the board on reorganizing, getting some things straightened away. So we actually have a very, very powerful team added in addition to the core team that was there.
So what is that you and Chris together will bring to Colonel?
Yeah, well, I mean, logically, more connections with sort of international investors. Also the ability to sort of engage partnerships at a higher level. Chris, in one of his companies, had 5,000 employees in India.
Wow.
So he's very familiar with, the Indian business culture from a corporate perspective. Becca has been spending a lot of time in India, is very familiar on the fintech side. I'm getting to know the lending side better. So between the various players, I feel like we have a very unique perspective on India. And actually spending time in India, talking with key players, they were shocked at the level of understanding we have of the market. Both some cultural aspects of how business is done in India, which is kind of similar to how business was done in Georgia back in the day, and maybe still a little bit. So I feel like we bring different perspectives, we bring different sort of reputations, and we bring different relationships. So yeah, we're just going to put all those factors together, and I think create some great momentum that hopefully will make some revenue and create value for the family, because the family is a meaningful shareholder, and this is the best thing that I could think of to do to help them.
Colin, as we talked before the interview, it was your first time in India. You just recently came from there. So let me ask you this: what are some unique particulars that you saw in this country, which is quite frankly, obviously the biggest country by population, but also quite big in terms of geography as well? Yeah,
well, it's remarkable. I mean, India is 500 times the size of Georgia. 500 times, almost five times the size of the U.S. So it is a very, very big country, and it's big geographically, but also the density of the cities, the sheer mass of people who are packed in, and like the shop, and you have the cars, and you have the motor rickshaws, and you have the mopeds, and you have the people walking in the street, and everything's just a press of humanity. So it's very intense, and I've had a lot of friends who've traveled to India over the years, and they warn me about the intensity of it there. Not just the press of humanity, but just some of the tragic poverty, just beggars on the street, just grabbing you and trying to get something. And it's hard because emotionally, you want to help people. Also, that there's certain dynamics. I don't know if you've seen Slumdog Millionaire, but there's certain dynamics that happen in the sort of beggar community or whatever you want to call it. So it was very, very, very intense. sort of on the street in a day-to-day basis. What was amazing, though, is even though it's a sort of way behind Georgia in development, the use of digital payments was amazing. Like, you'd get into this little motor rickshaw and you'd go and you'd do your trip. And you'd be like, oh, UPI. And they would show you the QR code. You would scan the QR code, and the taxi driver would get his money and go about his way. So everything was digital. Like, at one point when I was trying to find an ATM, people were just like looking at me like I was crazy, because everybody uses digital payments. Why do you need an ATM? Just use your phone. Yeah. So it was remarkable. And when you look at the big landscape, like just the tremendous scale of the transition of the economy, I mean, the Indian economy gained over $220 billion of value. That's just the growth this last year. And you look at the Georgian economy is $18 billion, the entire economy. So just this last year, it put on 12 times the Georgian economy in GDP. And a lot of lending is happening behind that. The Prime Minister really wants to go from $3 billion to $5 billion to $10 billion eventually. So the growth story is incredible. Similar growth to Georgia, but the scale is just huge. The growth rate is similar, but scale is huge. So
obviously the opportunity that Kernel sees in India is quite big.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask you to explain what is the opportunity, what is the niche that Kernel has found in India, and what are the steps that you are going to do to achieve that goal.
Great. So Becca, who is the founder of the company, and I come at from different perspectives. So he's probably talked about the software side. I'm going to not start there. I'm going to talk about the global credit gap for microenterprises. So all over the global south, there's a massive hunger for credit among these microenterprises. And the problem is, it's what my friend Chris calls a data desert, right? The banks want to lend, but they need information to justify their lending and to think that they're going to get paid back. There's not credit history, there's not banking history, there's not credit scores that are really useful. So the lack of this information means that the credit can't be extended to just so many people around the world. So in India, there's around $400 billion credit gap, where small and micro entrepreneurs may have viable businesses, but they can't access that credit. So that's really what we're trying to unlock. And so we're in an amazing position because we have this software that Becca and the team developed that micro enterprises can use. It's very easy, very simple, and we pretty much can give it away for free. There's no problem with cost of using this software, right? On the other hand, what we get from it is we get data. So if you have a couple million users doing all their invoices, keeping track of their inventory and all their basic financial information from their business, if you consolidate all that and you put on top of it these incredibly powerful tools of AI and machine learning, that is really the core asset that we're developing, right? So Kernel fundamentally, to me, it's a data play and it's a risk scoring play. So we can go to the banks and we can say, hey, for these 20 million or 10 million small businesses, we can help you make loans to them in a way that's going to be profitable for you. So those are 10, 20 million additional customers that financial institution would have access to. So this is really where we're playing. We don't have the depth of data to say, yeah, we have huge predictive validity now, but we have the system where when adoption happens in India, we're ready to look at that data. And we have a partnership with some folks who have an amazing tool which allows us to apply 27 algorithms, sort of AI, machine learning algorithms to this data. Essentially, if we had a 17-person data science team, that would be kind of a similar thing, but we can do it just in a more automated fashion. So there's lots of different things we're looking at doing with that data, but fundamentally, we believe that sitting on top of this sort of business data for millions of users will be an asset for us and also unlock capital for a lot of deserving businesses who just don't have that track record.
How do you capitalize on that data? Or in other words, what is the business model that the Kernel has?
Yeah. Well, we're exploring different things. I mean, the model we're working on proving now is just referral of qualified customers to lending institutions, right? So we're not lending off our balance sheet yet, but eventually we want to have a deep partnership with a financial institution where the data system is integrated, right? So we have information we're looking at from the business, and then the loan goes out, it gets approved, and then we know if they paid or if they defaulted. And then our engine can learn from this, right? So we would increase over time. So lending institutions want to make loans. If we give them good customers and some pre-qualification, they give us a percentage. But in the future, we want deeper partnerships. Also, there are people who are in the business of credit scoring. And so as our data set gets deeper and deeper, we can provide potentially some additional scoring data. And that can either be sold as a service to financial institutions, to somebody who's distributing scoring services. So there are lots of different possibilities. We haven't locked in, what the final suite of revenue tools are going to be, but those are a couple that we're in the process with.
As we all know, data harnessing is basically exponential thing after a certain point in time, threshold, and it just multiplies.
Yeah.
So once you have that data, what is the vision that you have for Kernel?
Yeah, well, I mean, we conceive of Kernel as being a global tool for unlocking opportunity for microenterprises. Quite frankly. And so how we go to market in all of the developing countries, we need to figure it out, right? Maybe there are big partners that we go to market with, maybe we're a standalone. I'm a big fan of finding people who are better at things than I am, and then doing a partnership where both sides get value. It's difficult because you need to find a trusted partner, and they need to deliver really well. But yeah, I mean, we see ourselves as having this flywheel of attracting people to really, really useful, easy software, and then becoming really, really excellent at making credit offers to the right people at the right time, and just increasing the efficiency of lending.
Are you planning on lending yourself in the future?
I don't want to be a banker. But I do want to inform the strategy of a lending partner, and I do want to own the data and the analytics on the data. So we're looking more for partners. If we have to create our own institution, we will. I mean, not afraid of it. But I would love just to be able to focus on the data side of it, because that's where the greater growth potential is, I believe.
What's the banking industry like in India? Obviously, India has a lot of states, so it might be different from state to state. But in general, what are the interest rates? Are they high? And what is the trajectory or the dynamics that the banking industry in the country has taken?
Yeah. So there are like 9,000 non-banking financial institutions in India, plus the banks. So it is a very diverse, and the different states and different cities have different folks specializing, different industries have different specialists. So it's very complex. Interest rates are actually not as high as I thought, but the biggest thing for us is the difference between official bank and NBFC, sort of non-banking finance people, and like the loan sharks. Because traditionally, all these folks kept their records on pieces of little notebooks, right? And then they couldn't go to the bank with that, so they had to go to some guy, right? And the rates there may be 30 whatever percent, which similar in Georgia. There were some really high interest rates in Georgia. It hasn't gotten quite that high, but yeah, it's become a dynamic where you have this predatory lending that's 30 or way even higher. And then you have maybe 20-something%, even in the teens, for some of the more conventional kind of lending. So there's a big difference between those two. So if we can do arbitrage between the two, I think there's value there. But there are a lot of players in the lending space. The banks tend to be very conservative because there's such a big market, right? That they can really focus on the bigger, more valuable clients. And the little guys kind of get left to the side. And then we're fine to sort of gather that up and try to package it into something of value.
What is the prognosis that you can make for India in terms of one, digitalization, and two, development of the financial ecosystem as well, in context of the law that basically is very good and useful for kernel, which enables, which requires from some companies to do reporting digitally. So what is the next 5 to 10 years? What they're going to look like?
It's going to be super interesting. Becca talks a lot about having seen this happen in Georgia and the changes and how credit opened up for people, and then the economy just kind of took off. Similar thing happening in India. So you mentioned there's this GST law that's essentially about taxation, and they have some small tax that is put on commerce. And the challenge is there's the tax, and that's one thing, but then there's also the reporting, right? A lot of these folks, it's just in the notebooks, right? And they have to put information into the portal. Okay, well, your chartered accountant does it, but now the government is moving to where you have to have an e-invoice, like, around the time that you're actually sending it. You need to submit it to the government portal. You need an e-way bill if you're transporting goods. If you don't have an e-way bill, you can be stopped and you can be fined or even worse, like once the enforcement starts. So you want to be able to just from your phone put the e-way bill in the government portal so you don't get in trouble, because you can't have your accountant do it every time. It's just not very practical. So this is going to push a lot of users to take what's going in the notebook into the digital era. It's going to go on their phone, and they're going to be using it day to day for their transactions. Maybe not everybody, but a good chunk of people. And when that happens, they're going to have better optics on their business. They're going to be able to we're going to automatically supply them with some analytics about what's going on with their business. It's going to open up credit opportunities for them. So the rate of change is just going to take off. I mean, with these micro enterprises, for the ones that want to grow, it's going to be an amazing time. And the banking institutions, there are a lot of fintechs. And what's interesting in India is you have the banks and financial institutions, and you have the fintechs. And they're not trying to create like challenger banks and compete with the banks. They're finding opportunities where they can bring customers to the bank, or they can create better services or better user experience. So the fintechs are operating alongside the financial institutions, which is a very interesting model. And it's something I think that we should talk about more in Georgia, is what are the ways things can be complementary. So yeah, I see the banking sector just becoming very, very interesting, but more on the back of the fintechs that are creating the innovation.
You just mentioned several times people with notebooks.
Yeah.
Whenever you go to those people and you tell them that, oh, look, I have kernel, I have software that will enable you to do the same thing in a digital realm with analytics, everything. What is the response that you get? Is it tough? Is it tough to negotiate? Is it tough to explain to them what you bring?
Oh yeah, I mean, change is a pain. Nobody likes change, right? And if it's some strange foreign guy saying this widget is better than what you're doing, like, the guy's crazy, right? Like, so obviously, I'm like crazy guy. And so we're not the ones who are going to be doing this, right? So what we need to do is we need to convince people who are the heads of industry associations, business associations, trusted organizations for the business community. We need to get them to understand the benefits to their members. Each member doesn't need to understand all of the details. All they need to know is it's easier to do compliance, and these guys are okay. Like those are really the two things that we're hoping comes down in the signal. We'd love to help people get in and do education on top of that, sort of financial management for micro businesses. But it's not our job, but we can do diagnostics on the businesses and see what they need, and then partners could help them learn more about the benefits of these tools.
What sort of team do you have based in India? What are these people doing? Yeah,
so the folks in India are market facing. It's all about taking care of the customers. Right? Like I said, we're strange foreign people. We're not going to be the ones who are on the front line. So the people who are taking care of customers are really good customer service and sales people in India. So we have in Georgia, we actually have our tech team in Georgia, because we found that we were able to get more productivity per lari from our friends in Georgia who are like talented tech people than it was to like hire strangers in India.
Yeah,
right?
and India is one of the biggest markets for that, especially Bangalore, right?
Yeah, there are so many developers in India, but you know, there are also so many corporates, and so the prices have gone up, and really startups are about finding true believers, right? And so we have a team here who really believes in creating this vision, right? It's not just about a job; it's about creating something important. And if we, succeed, everybody's going to get rich. But that's not something which we've found in India in the same way. So the sales team are sort of compensated in standard ways. They really love what we're doing, but they're compensated in standard ways. So digital marketing happens here. Misho does the digital marketing and is great at that. And then we get leads that come in, and then the Indian staff will reach out to them, onboard them, do a demonstration of the tool, help them activate and become regular users. So it's all about customer care on the Indian side. And the tech and strategy is out of Georgia for now. I'd love to get a country manager in India who is some hotshot young entrepreneur, but it takes time.
So you still don't have a country manager based in India?
No, we had a guy who was sort of acting as country manager, but he was used to more kind of higher scale stuff, and we're still in the R&D. We're in research and development. We're in the lab. We're not trying to scale massively. We're trying to prove the model now, so that when GST compliance comes in, then we can scale and but right before GST comes in, we want to raise a bunch of money, and then GST will create this massive demand. So that's when we really need somebody more like him. Yeah. So he's very interested, but it was too early he came on.
How many employees do you have right now? Both Georgia and India.
Yeah, around 10.
Wow.
How it's structured, some are contract, some are employees, but super lean team. And we're getting, in growing headcount in a startup does not necessarily grow your capacity linearly. If you have a small number of really good folks, you actually can get really, really far, especially with some of the tools that are on the market now to make things efficient.
Yeah, let's talk about the tools. One of them, the general name for that is artificial intelligence. How do you use AI in kernel?
Yeah, I mean, so this idea we're going to sit on a massive set of data. We're very lucky because a friend of mine developed a tool which is a super interesting, semi-automated AI/ML. So semi-automated, artificial intelligence, machine learning. So this tool allows you to do basically what a team of 17 data scientists might do, right? You can apply 27 different algorithms to a data set. You can see which has the greatest predictive validity, and you can focus on building your model with that algorithm. You also can look at large data sets and see what predicts this outcome, right? And there may be stuff in your data that you had no idea was going to be correlated with this outcome, right? And then you find something to look at. So it's basically we end up in a bit of an experimental lab again, but with data and looking at the things that drive outcomes. So we have a partnership. Again, when I say we have 10 people, we also have various other external sort of partners. But we have a partner who has this very, very powerful tool that actually he'll be visiting Georgia later this spring, and we'll be meeting with some local businesses and seeing if they are interested in testing this out as well. But for now, we're kind of just piloting ourselves.
Wow. That's very nice. That's very nice and very interesting to see that you can have a software that does the thing that 17 people would do, especially data scientists. Data scientists are usually it's very technical and they have to be very efficient. So wow.
Yeah. This is there's a patent that's associated with some of the tuning of the algorithms, and it's pretty cool stuff.
Nice. Colin, let me ask you the last question, which concerns Georgia.
Yeah.
I understand that the kernel is focused on India, which makes sense. It's 1.5 billion people living there, so it's an enormous market. But given that Georgia is a launchpad of kernel, what are the plans, the vision that you have for Georgia? And then, in general, what are the future plans for kernel in 2024 and beyond?
Yeah. So we realized we've been focusing on India a lot. When I came on board, I realized that we needed to do something with our presence in Georgia and the Philippines. We have a bunch of customers in the Philippines and in Georgia. We're going to focus initially on getting that sort of delegated. So we're looking at who we might partner with in Georgia to provide this essentially like an ERP. A very light ERP that small businesses and micro businesses can use on their phone. So there may be banks that are interested in having a branded app that their customers have, and if they want finance, they can apply through the app, like embedded finance. There's also a accounting firm that we're talking with who may be interested in providing this as a service where if you could do certain reporting to the revenue service that in an automated way, it could be very nice for certain customers who don't really want to hire an accountant, but they just need some very simple services. So related to that, USAID actually has this financial innovation program. And there's an element there about getting innovative access to capital for small businesses. And so we're kind of a perfect fit for that because we do work in the space of small businesses access to capital. And so if in our app you can see all of the invoices and the timing of the invoices, then you can use that for invoice financing. We also have inventory. You can see the value of what's in their warehouse, potentially warehouse financing. So we're very interested in exploring with USAID if we can use this as essentially a platform. In that case, it would be just an open platform for small businesses and micro businesses to be able to have a simple financial management and reporting tool.
Well, so as I see, Georgia still remains as a sort of testing ground for Kernel, and
absolutely, and we have really good partners here, so that's a big element. The one thing I would want to say just about Georgia and things I think about in Georgia, with Gio's passing, there are some things we want to do. We want to create startup awards in his name, so people who embodied his heart and his generosity and his servant leadership, that we can recognize those people and uplift the values that Gio stood for, really and touch thousands of people, in Georgia and around the world. We also want to really focus on helping the family. The family is trying to has hired a lawyer to try to be clear on what happened and responsibilities and what happened, and we don't that can't be forgotten. So it's very important that people pay attention, and if there are responsibilities that caused the accident, that people be held to account. So those are, so memorializing Gio and trying to get justice for the family are two of the big things that we see as important in Georgia.
Colin, last question about Startup Connect and Startup Grind, because we talked even in interview format, and you have the logo on your hoodie as well. Right. What is the future for these projects? Will you still be involved?
Sure. So I had put a lot of time into these things, and I have to pull back from that. But because there are lots of good people around who want to continue them, so for example, Nia Basaria will be taking on more and more responsibility for Startup Connect. We're looking at other partners who can help with event organizing. Maybe one of our sponsors might come in to help event organizing. So I can focus on connecting with the international VCs and relevant people like that. I can work on developing the sort of like the construct, the ideas of the meeting, and getting the judges for Startup World Cup. So June 1st and 2nd, we will be having another Startup World Cup and Georgian Startup Summit. This will be open to international competition, so nice. We'll have actually some very strong, I think, startups competing from different countries, and we'll be attracting some very interesting investors. So sort of building on our experience with Sturgeon Capital, where we did a networking event, we're going to be doing really intense matchmaking for that. So again, I'm just going to be the architect of it. I can't be on the front lines, but I think it's important that it continue for Georgia. And now Kernel, as a startup, wants to participate in that. So I'll be wearing a different hat at the event.
Well, thank you very much, Colin. Good
Yeah.
luck to you. Good luck to Colonel. And let's see, we shall talk soon as well about, Colonel becoming a unicorn. Hopefully, very soon.
Knock on wood. All right, thanks, Georgi.
Thank you very much.
So we're closing off today's The Checkpoints with this very interesting interview. We'll meet next Sunday, 11 a.m. sharp. But before that, you know what to do. You have to stay and check us out periodically at bm.g for more news on business and economics and beyond in Georgia and beyond. Take care.
The Checkpoints is presented by pharmaceutical company GM Pharma.